Conjunction, junction, what's your function? Yes, indeed. Thank God for Schoolhouse Rock. Or else I don't know how I would have made it out of fourth grade. I pray that you who are teachers are still using it to impart life's lessons to the next generation. On this solemnity of Christ, the King of the universe, I invite us to consider what is the function of a king. And maybe more importantly, what is the function of those who would call themselves followers, subjects, disciples of a said king? Let's take the latter first. What defines you? Or put another way, how do we define ourselves and others? When you meet someone for the first time, it's likely that while making small talk, you will ask, or you will be asked, "So, what do you do?" What we're asking there is, what's your function? What's your function in life? And you may respond, well, I'm a salesman, or I'm an accountant, or I work in IT, or I'm a teacher who uses Schoolhouse Rock to impart life's lessons to the next generation. Those are all well and good functions. But those are what we do, not who we are. So go beyond function. Think of a first-time father or mother. At the moment of the birth of their child, or even 9 months prior when they learn that they are expecting, they are forever changed. From that point forward, regardless of what happens, they will always be a father, a mother. Their identity has been irrevocably changed. This differs from most functions in life. I think back to when I was named the editor of my high school yearbook. That didn't change my fundamental nature. I was still just a goofy high school kid. I had a function, I had a responsibility, produce and make sure the yearbook gets out, delivered to the students by the end of the year. But that function was not my identity. We think of those in positions of power, primarily in terms of their function, something they do, not who they are. A mayor, governor, president, even your boss all have positions of power, but that function is tied up in their role, in their responsibility. Once their term of service comes to an end, their power does as well. Their function, at least as exercised by themselves, is no longer needed. Someone else will assume it. And so on this final Sunday of the church's liturgical year, I invite us to consider the role, the function, the identity of Jesus Christ. As one who's truly human, truly God, fully human, fully God, we can say that his identity is his function, and his function is his identity. This solemnity, this feast that we celebrate today, Christ the King, it's 100 years old this year. It was established by Pope Pius XI, who in 1925 saw the world changing. Think of what's going on in history at that time. World War I has concluded not long before. Mussolini is on the rise in Italy. New republics were coming into power, replacing ancient monarchies throughout all of Europe and even across the globe. New governments were on the rise in Mexico, South, Central America. And with them all came an absence of God. The idea that power comes from the people alone, independent of God's will, was an idea that the church needed to confront. And so it did. But where does real power come from? How is it exercised? It's a question that's still quite relevant for the world we live in today. In life, we tend to distinguish power from those who possess it. Yet, in Jesus Christ, there is no difference between what Christ does and who Christ is. He is the presence and power of God. God among us. God who came to this world and who will come again. But Christ reigns as an altogether different type of king. He wasn't like the earthly kings that we know, who grasp power assimilated to themselves by sheer force and might. No, Jesus Christ is an eternal sacrifice. And what he does is actually surrender power, ostensibly to his enemies, those who would seek his death, but ultimately he is surrendering himself to the Father, who willed that he should transform death itself. Death, that unfathomable depth of alienation from God. In today's gospel from St. Luke, Christ is king because he leads the way to that transformation. He leads even from the cross, especially from the cross. He gives himself to the will of the Father, for he and the Father are one. He doesn't give it to the world, he gives it to whence it came. The king dies, this king dies, so that his subjects may live. No other king does that. Thus it is that ours is not some unknown God up in the heavens, powerful and distant, but rather a God who is close, who draws near to his people, tender and compassionate, whose arms open and console and forgive. This is our King. So if this is our King, what's our function as subjects of the King? We call ourselves that, right? We wear little crucifixes around our necks. We call ourselves after his name, Christian. What's our function as related to the King? Consider the good thief. Notice Jesus crucified two thieves on his right and on his left. The good thief, as he's so called, asked only to be remembered in the kingdom. In that moment before he dies, it's startling how innocent of a request it seems to be. Jesus, remember me in your kingdom. It's as if he's asking Jesus for a favor. But because this king is different, because Jesus is mercy incarnate, he cannot simply just remember him. No, he has to go beyond. And so he promises that this day he'll be with him in paradise. Because his identity is uniquely tied to his function, Jesus Christ the King promises life in the face of death. And thanks be to God, still does so today. For the same is true for you and me. Sisters and brothers, we are not in this world to save ourselves. You try that, you will fail. That's what the other thief did. He's looking out for number one. Save us. No, our work is to bring our brothers and sisters into the embrace of this King and his kingship. Dare we follow Christ, the King, to the cross? Dare we die to our sin and our life, the personal and communal sin that wreaks havoc on the world? Dare we do that so that we and all of God's children, not just in it for ourselves, but all of God's children, might inherit so much more? Remember me when you come into your kingdom. Our happiness in life, our personal well-being in this world and in the world to come is accomplished not by seizing power, but in surrendering to it. For therein lies our identity in Christ Jesus. Therein is our function in Christ Jesus. Therein is our life and hope in him.